3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down for cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
I'm Christiana Manpour near Kyiv. This is CNN.
Nine o'clock at night here in Brussels, an hour to go of trading on Wall Street. We'll watch, of course, the markets and how they've been reacting to the events of the day. Stocks, though, are at session lows. We're getting to the last day of the quarter, and as you take a look at how things are, it's the worst quarter, by the way, since the pandemic crash. The way the markets are looking at the moment, and the main events of the day. The US has made a bold move to help bring down oil prices. It's going to use the Strategic Petroleum Reserve and release 1 million barrels a day. We'll talk about that. It happens on the same day that President Putin is threatening to cut off gas supplies to Europe. We have the EU Commissioner live on this program. And we hear from Lufthansa's chief executive talking about higher oil prices today. Also how the pandemic showed the value of travel. Put it all together, and tonight, yep, I'm live in Brussels. Last day of March, it is Thursday, March the 31st. In Brussels, I'm Richard Quest, and I mean business. Good evening from Brussels this evening, the seat of European Union power, if you will, where there have been major developments across Europe in terms of oil. And it's about oil that we will be talking about a great deal this evening. On both sides of the Atlantic, there have been announcements concerning oil and the conflict in Ukraine. Also tonight, we'll be talking to top policymakers, the European Economics Commissioner and the aviation industry. On tonight's programme, they've been gathered here for their Airlines for Europe summit. On this programme, you will hear from the CEO of Lufthansa, Ryanair, the EU Economics Commissioner, and also the Director General of the EU Transport Division. Let's start in the United States today. History was made as President Biden invoked war powers to tackle America's energy crisis. The president is using the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. More than 700 million barrels are in the reserve, set up specifically for emergency use to help the supply into the market. The president will use his powers and release 1 million barrels a day for 6 months. And at the same time, he will pressurize US oil companies to produce more, probably from fracking and non-traditional methods. You can see the effect it had on the market. Brent fell some 5% at $105 a barrel. Last month, the swing has been from 100 to 130 and back again. But more oil from the SPR is considered to be obviously a major positive. The president said the extra oil will help the US get through the driving season, the summer to September.
Today, I'm authorizing the release of 1 million barrels per day for the next 6 months, over 180 million barrels from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is a wartime bridge to increase oil supply until production ramps up later this year. And it is by far the largest release of our national reserve in our history. It will provide a historic amount of supply for a historic amount of time. A 6-month bridge to the fall.
Here in Europe, Russia has gone head-to-head, or is going head-to-head, on the question of gas supplies to Europe, threatening to cut off gas supplies to Europe if energy is not paid for in rubles, starting basically tomorrow. Unfriendly countries is how President Putin describes it, who don't comply with that would help stabilize the currency. Now, the ruble, which collapsed after the invasion, up to 140 plus rubles for the dollar, recovered because of the drastic measures, because it's forcing Europe to use European euros or dollars into rubles supports the currency. Our correspondents have great details on this and give us insight. It's Matt Egan in New York, Claire Sebastian in London. Matt, this was a dramatic announcement from the president. It is a bridge, as he said. How much realistically will $1 million a day from the SPR bring down or support prices?
Well, Richard, this amounts to a shock and awe campaign from the White House. This release of 180 million barrels of oil. This is 3 times bigger than anything we've ever seen before. So it is big. The problem is that this shock to the market is even bigger, caused by the war in Ukraine. There's so many barrels of oil from Russia that have been knocked offline. And so the experts that I'm talking to, they're skeptical here that this is really going to do enough to actually put a real big dent in prices. And what we saw was oil prices came down last night on the rumors of this announcement. And in the last hour or so, U.S. oil actually went below $100 a barrel after the president was speaking. So it is having an impact. But it's not going to be enough, I don't think, to suddenly make oil go dramatically lower. I don't think it's going to dramatically lower gasoline prices. And in fact, some of the experts that I'm talking to said that they still anticipate that prices at the pump in the United States are going to go back up to record highs, hitting fresh records this summer. But I think at the end of the day, Richard, so much depends on what actually happens in the war in Ukraine and how many barrels from Russia are actually knocked offline.
Claire Sebastian in London, the decision to force payments in rubles. It's a very complicated mechanism to do with opening up special K accounts and money being transferred from here to there and back again. But substantially, that's going to be the way Germany et al. Will have to pay if they want Russian gas and oil.
Richard, Putin made that extremely clear today. If they don't pay according to this mechanism, then he will stop deliveries. It all boils down, of course, to sanctions. He said, look, we've been delivering gas, Europe's been paying in euros, and then they've been freezing those euros, and he said that we expect those sanctions to continue, and so we have to protect ourselves. But if you really dig into the detail of this, Richard, this is where it gets interesting, because it really doesn't seem like practically anything will change for Russia's gas customers in Europe. Essentially, the mechanism is that they pay their euros or whatever currency they're already paying into Gazprom Bank, which is the bank that already carries out transactions for Gazprom. Gazprom will then trade those euros, for example, into rubles on the exchanges, and then pay them into a special account, which will then complete the transaction. So really, this is just work for Gazprom Bank. It doesn't seem like on the surface anything will actually change from Europe. But European countries, we had from Germany, France, the UK today, they say they are not going to change the currency in which they're going to pay for gas. So right now, they're saying no, even though this mechanism doesn't seem to change anything for them.
Because it's a massive form of support for the ruble if this goes through in the way it's envisaged. Matt Egan, how much of what President Biden did is political? How much is economic?
That's a good question. I think only the president can answer that. But there's no secret that high inflation and especially high prices for gasoline have been a huge political negative for the president. So there is a political calculation that has to go in here. But I think there's also an economic one, because the higher that oil prices go, the greater the risk of an economic slowdown, both in the United States and overseas. And that, of course, is not good for anyone. But I think the problem here is that, there's a limit to how much oil countries can release from their emergency reserves. I mean, this is not a bottomless pit. Even before this war began, the SPR in the United States was sitting at a 20-year low. And the 180 million barrels that are going to be released throughout the next 6 months will wipe out a third of what's left, bringing reserves down to the lowest level since 1984, at a time, of course, when the United States was smaller in terms of how much oil it consumed and the size of the economy. We should get fresh details on all of this, though, tomorrow. The International Energy Agency is holding an emergency meeting tomorrow to discuss next steps. That's according to a person familiar with the matter telling CNN. And the President of the United States said today that we could expect to hear another 30 million to 50 million barrels of emergency releases from other countries in addition to what the United States has done. And the president correctly said that the more oil that gets released, the bigger the impact on prices.
Right.
Of course, again, we don't know how long that impact is going to last.
Claire, finally to you. Claire, is it likely that Putin will switch off the gas?
You know, Richard, that is the big question. I think in the way that would be shooting himself in the foot, because Russia does need the money from selling gas at a time when its economy is really struggling under the weight of sanctions. I think this is potentially something that he wanted to do that then perhaps his central bank or his advisors told him to sort of dial back and create this compromise mechanism. I think ultimately Russia does not want to switch off the taps because of the revenue that it gets from oil. But and of course that would be hugely detrimental to its customers. So look, we see where this goes, but there might be a way for both sides in this situation to sort of claim victory. For Europe to say, well, this actually doesn't change anything for us, and for Russia to say, yes, look, they've agreed to our mechanism. But for that, Europe has to find a way to agree to this without looking like it's supporting Russia and President Putin.
Claire Sebastian in London, Matt Egan in New York. To both of you, thank you. Now with me here in Brussels is Paolo Gentiloni, the EU Economics Commissioner. First of all, Commissioner, thank you. Braving this extraordinary breeze tonight.
Absolutely.
Cold.
We need energy.
You can't afford it. The problem with energy at the moment is the Russians are saying you've got to buy it in rubles. It's a complicated way of doing it. European governments are saying they're not going to. Why not?
Well, of course, this decree was issued a few hours ago, so we are still looking into details. But two things are quite clear. First, contracts must be respected, and in the existing contract there is no obligation to pay in rubles.
Right.
Second, we will not be blackmailed by Moscow.
That's the real reason. The contract bit is a nice way of getting to the real reason. You're basically saying it's blackmail.
It's an attempt to circumvent sanctions and to blackmail the European Union, but it is anything that the existing contracts allow to do.
But if this construct of paying to a K bank in dollars or euros, which are then converted by Gazprom Bank into rubles, you're still paying in your own currency. So why is this against it?
Well, I think we have contracts to be respected. I understand the maneuver which is behind this, because of course the Russian economy was severely hit by these sanctions. The rubles need to be reinforced by Putin. All this is part of the game. But our reaction was a reaction justified by this war. So at the end, final point, we will not be blackmailed.
Then, I mean, the awful part is that we go to extremes here, and the extremes is the gas will be turned off.
Well, you know that this is an issue for the European economy, but we are ready for this issue.
Now, clearly the Russian economy is going to suffer far worse, but what's your latest view on how the European economies are going to suffer as a result, firstly, of the invasion, the extraordinary refugee crisis, and now what could be an oil shock?
Well, listen, there is a military aggression. If we want to respond to a military aggression with economic means, not with military means, we have to do this in a coherent way and ready also to pay some prices. So, of course, we will pay some prices, but this is what we have to do, support Ukraine and have strong sanctions. Personally, I was foreign minister when annexation of Crimea happened. I see in this moment a stronger, more united reaction from Europe, impressive and affecting the Russian economy.
What economic support do you think you may end up having to provide to European countries? Now, of course, obviously, initially it's a national issue for countries on a fiscal basis.
Yeah.
But if they turn to require further support from the centre, what can you offer?
Well, I think we can immediately offer two things. First, joint procurement of gas and oil with our partners around the world. And second, common storage, with also some new things that we have to do. Interconnection, which is not in all parts of Europe function.
Right.
We need to build our independence from Russian oil and gas.
You say when you were foreign minister in Crimea and then on for prime minister after, do you now realize that more should have been done post 2014 towards energy independence or dependence from Russia, and instead Europe went the other way, full stream with Nord Stream 2?
Well,
well, the reason I ask it is because you don't want to make the same mistake again after this crisis.
yes, I think this crisis was a wake-up call. Putin forced us in a month to do something that we were not able to do in 10 years. And in 1 month, both in energy and in common defense, the European Union decided something for our strategic autonomy, which is, I think, extraordinary. You are right. We should have done this before. But now we are doing it. And Putin miscalculated the European unity and reaction.
Is the European economy, in your view, strong enough to withstand the oil shock that could be about to hit it?
Well, we entered this crisis in a strong footing. So we had 4% growth, very good employment. So I think we can afford also a decrease of this growth. We will have a decrease of this growth, but not entering in negative territory.
Commissioner, you've got a much more sensible coat on than I have, I can tell you that. You're more used to this.
Thank you, and good luck for this evening.
I know you're a hot drinker, so not on another occasion. Commissioner, thank you very much indeed for joining us. It's Crossways Business. It is absolutely freezing here in Brussels tonight. But when we come back, there's warm talk, hot talk indeed, from airline CEOs. It's the Airlines for Europe, and you'll hear from the chief executive of Lufthansa on connection keys and keeping Europe open, a pandemic and after the invasion.
As in all human conflict, adults fight and children suffer. Today, 7.5 million children in Ukraine need to find water and shelter. They need safety and school. They need a place to sleep and comfort in the dark. Show them the world cares. Support UNICEF. On the ground in Ukraine, we won't stop until every child is safe. See how at unicef.org.
To open doors, to develop contacts, and to unlock secrets, it takes trust.
It was the first time he really came out of his shell in front of a camera.
Trust that you'll listen.
It's so great that you're here today. It just highlights what's making a difference.
That you'll be honest.
I don't want to pry, but what sort of conversations do you have with them?
Trust that you'll be accurate and you'll be fair.
It was an unprecedented move. Very eerie. All the roads have been closed off.
Describe the theme that you arrived to. The Apache attack helicopter.
This is what Captain Wales has been flying.
Do you want talks with them?
What is the point of talking now?
Huge amounts of police support coming into this protest. We continue to monitor the government in crisis. This was the Duchess's first news interview.
Rare access indeed. That's what it's all about.
Max Foster, CNN.
Welcome back. Crespin's Business tonight in Brussels. The Airlines for Europe, which is the lobbying or the representative group of European airlines, have been meeting here. Lufthansa's chief executive says that the war in Ukraine is causing huge challenges with airspace being closed and, of course, the rising fuel price on the back of the war. Now, if you look at how closed airspace affects the airlines, remember they can't fly over Ukraine, it's too dangerous, and Russia has banned all European carriers from flying over there. So look at this flight from Frankfurt to Beijing. Now, before the invasion, the flight time was 8 hours 43 minutes. On average, because it has to go a different way, that same flight is taking 10 hours and 6 minutes. It's having to avoid Russian airspace. But of course, keeping communities connected and countries in contact means the flights continue to have to go. Some of them are even more egregious. Take, for example, the JAL flight from Haneda to London. But even so, the flight from Frankfurt to Beijing makes the valid point. It's costing the airlines dear. I spoke to Carsten Spohr earlier about the crisis.
There's clearly huge operational challenges to reroute traffic either southbound or, in our case, going home from Tokyo. We're actually leaving eastbound from Tokyo to arrive via Greenland in Europe. So things we haven't done in decades. But it's also fair to say all this is only possible in such a smooth way because of the limited amount of flights from Europe to and from Asia. If we had normal volumes, I think there would be huge operational challenges. One way or another, the industry would solve it. But right now, the airspace is sufficient to provide customers with the service we do, even though flight times are endorsed up to 2 hours.
I mean, the interesting point is, in an era when everybody is so concerned about the environment, you have no choice. I mean, if you look at the JAL flight to London, you look at the ones coming from up from Australia and over the top, you've got no choice.
No, I think because we all agree, including the passengers on board, that connectivity in this case is a higher priority. We cannot allow us to be cut off from Asia as Europe, and the same applies to the US. So I think here it shows the value of our industry, even with additional burdens on the environment or financially. Connectivity is key to keep this world as peaceful as possible, and it's our industry which is providing it.
The return post-COVID, it's been impressive on the leisure side, and we are all still waiting to see what the direction will be on the business side. Do you have any view or any idea yet of the way it's moving forward?
Well, first of all, we know that lead times for bookings in corporate travel are shorter. So it's by math, you'll see this effect later than you see it on the leisure side. That's one thing. Secondly, if you look at Europe, we're now just starting to really release the restrictions in the offices. People are allowed to return. The mask is coming away. So I think it's becoming more and more natural to go on a business trip while we speak. And this, I think, we'll be seeing in the next weeks and months very clearly.
Are you in favor of lifting the mask mandate on the aircraft?
Oh, we actually just decided a few minutes ago to start tomorrow in Swiss to allow our passengers to take the mask off in Swiss, flying to and from Switzerland from countries where it also must be allowed, which is quite a few. So I think we'll see this over the next days, waiting for the US. Obviously, this might happen soon as well, so yes.
Why do you want ITA in Italy? The history of, I mean, you've already had an investment in Italy, of course, but the history of people getting involved or airlines getting involved with the national carrier of Italy has not been a good one. Why would you wish to join the ranks?
Well, first of all, Lufthansa has a very specific view on Italy. It's our most important foreign market after the US. And we already are number one to and from Italy for long-range travel. So that's the market. ITA, let's not forget, Lufthansa has lots of experience with restructured national carriers. We didn't buy Swiss Air, but we bought Swiss. We didn't buy Sabena, but we bought the restructured Brussels Airlines. We wouldn't have invested into Alitalia, but we are keeping our options open to potentially invest into ITA. So there is a market specifics for the Lufthansa Group, and there is experience in buying restructured national carriers, and that might come together in the case of ITA and Lufthansa here.
But the one thing we've learned from the Italian market, from the previous one, is if you're going to go into this, you've got to be able to get your hands around the neck of the beast and run it your way.
Well, I don't think I like that way of describing it. I think we've found a nice balance of allowing national brands to have certain autonomy, to make them continuously part of the local economy and the local society. If you call somebody in Switzerland or in Austria or in Belgium, I hope they would agree that they are still proud of their national carrier, of course, being aware it belongs to the Lufthansa Group. So I think when the Italians are making a choice, I'm sure they will call Switzerland or will call in Vienna, will call in Brussels to learn how we did it there, and then hopefully they take the right decision.
If we look at the industry now in Europe, what for you is the number one priority?
Well, first of all, and you know me long enough, number one priority is always safety.
Yeah,
always,
yeah,
and I know you're not asking for that, but let me repeat that regardless where the question is directed for. But coming now to probably your thinking, for me, running the largest European carrier with my team, competing globally, it is a level playing field around the world. So it's one thing to have a level playing field in Europe, which more or less exists, but it's not a level playing field with other players who we are competing with around the world who are outside of Europe. Near East, but even in the US, there's been significant support for airlines over the COVID period in a different way than we've seen it in Europe. It's great for my partner United, and also I loathe all these guys running the other airlines. Tomorrow is the first day of Robert in American, so we're all kind of friends in this industry and we do what we do. But when you look at this in a neutral way, we want a level playing field also for European carriers, and we don't think it's there.
How unlevel, if you will, do you think the playing field is? Because without getting into the minutiae, the Gulf says that you got X billion, you tell them you've got it, you paid it back, the US carriers say this. So everybody says that nobody comes to the table with clean hands. How unlevel?
But I think to enable us to speak as an industry and have an open dialogue on this, sometimes it's good to look away from whatever is water under the bridge. The history, we were all national carriers at some time, so what? Let's look forward. You know, how are we changing the level playing field to either become better or become worse? This is a thing where we should focus on. And Fit for 55 here in Europe has a huge potential to not be fit for purpose and not help the environment, but help those carriers who care less for the environment outside of Europe, have a negative impact on the environment, and make the level playing field even less leveled.
Carsten Spohr, the Chief Executive of the Lufthansa Group, talking to me here. And when we come back, I will be visiting the front lines in Kyiv, where Ukrainian soldiers show us how they stopped the Russian advance. And the Chief Executive of Ryanair, he wants the likes of us to stop blaming the likes of him for climate change.
I blame the media.
Oh, come on.
Because you want to show global warming, it's always a picture of an aircraft taking off out of an airport.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson.
It all starts here. Changing, fighting, creating, connecting. That's why we're here. We live here, we work here, we're from here, and we'll go wherever the story takes us.
I'm Becky Anderson in Tehran.
We are in Jerusalem. Real news that shapes our world. Exploring not just what's going on, but why.
I just want to press you on one further point.
Getting perspective on this region from this region. Places that many of us know, but few of us get to see. Observing countries on the move, still rooted in tradition. It all starts here, and that's why we're here, bringing you the world from our Middle Eastern hub.
Connect the World with Becky Anderson, Monday through Friday on CNN.
fundamentally, the world is changing very rapidly because of technology and globalization, and people need to learn new skills. And if they do, there's a wide range of new opportunities for new jobs if people get skilled up. So we think this is going to persist far beyond the pandemic. There's a lot of interest for individuals coming directly to Coursera Online to take professional certificates, to learn the skills, to get new digital careers. But the other thing that we're seeing is that businesses are realizing that embracing technology, going digital, moving to the cloud, using AI makes them more competitive. And so businesses are upskilling their employees using Coursera. And now, post-pandemic, universities and colleges all around the world, even as students come back to campus, they're realizing that integrating online learning into the way that students learn is a great way to provide flexibility and also access to emerging skills.
I'm Paula Newton in Ottawa, and this is CNN.
Hello, I'm Richard Quest here in Brussels. There's a lot more Quest News business to you this evening. President Putin's lashing out, not only with his oil threat, but also barring top EU officials from visiting or entering Russia. And the chief executive of Ryanair this evening, Michael O'Leary, European aviation facing the perfect storm. Higher costs, more disruption. We'll get to all of that in just a moment, only after I've updated you with your news headlines. This is CNN, and of course, here, the news always comes first. President Biden says there's some indication Vladimir Putin's self-isolated and punishing his advisors. But he adds the US doesn't have much hard evidence. US officials said earlier this week they were confident in assessments that Putin is being led astray by the Russian military about the war's success. Shanghai is expanding its COVID lockdown as cases there rise. Most of the city's 25 million residents now have to stay home. Residents in the eastern part of Shanghai have been locked down since Monday. The Republican Senator Lindsey Graham says he will vote against President Biden's Supreme Court nominee. He voted last year to confirm Judge Ketanji Brown Jackson to a federal appeals court. However, she does appear on track to be confirmed by the full Senate as early as next week. Now, senior US defense officials say that Russian forces do appear to be drawing down from parts of northern Ukraine. Signs of the drawdown appear to be taking place particularly from Chernobyl, north and northwest of Kiev, and likely to have abandoned the Hostomel airport. So what exactly is going on? Christiane Amanpour visited the front lines northeast of Kyiv, where she witnessed firsthand the humanitarian crisis, and the Ukrainian soldiers showed how they stopped the Russian advance.
The first thing you notice approaching the front northeast of Kyiv are the lines of villagers waiting for humanitarian handouts. They receive a bag of bread and basics to get them through these difficult days. The first week of the war, a shell hit us near the greenhouse. We barely survived, says this woman. We had help from strangers around us. They gave us bread and canned food. We wouldn't have managed otherwise. No one here knows when this war will end or whether Russia still has designs on Kyiv. The front line is about a mile away. For now, an uneasy calm prevails ever since the Ukrainian defenders stopped the Russian advance here. It was February 28th, they say, day 4 of the war. They want to show us how they did it, but first we have to clamber over the bridge they downed to see the armored column they managed to take out. The riverbank is littered with their skeletons, and this was a turkey shoot. Russian armored vehicles and tanks had come off the road to avoid the anti-tank mines, only to find themselves unable to cross the bridge and unable to reverse in time. Ukrainian forces tell us none of the soldiers inside survived. A little further up the road, 2 tanks have been virtually smelted, blasted almost to smithereens. 40-year-old Yevgeny, a veteran fighter, proudly tells us this was his handiwork. We all here have one role, to keep the enemy off our land, he says. First thing they did after seeing the village, they started to shell houses just like that. They didn't see us. They didn't know we were here, so they just started to work on houses. And so I took the tank in my sights and I fired a rocket. And goodbye to him. The destroyed vehicles are stamped with an O. The Ukrainian officers here tell us this identifies them as Russian units that entered from Belarus to the north. Oleg is the officer who commanded this operation. As for now, looking at previous fighting we've had, I can tell you that we are trained better, he tells me. We have stronger morale and spirit because we're at home. They are afraid, but they go because they're made to. He's been battle-hardened ever since the first Russian invasion in 2014. He says his side has enough weapons, ammunition, and determination to win. I can tell you I'm almost sure the Russians are regrouping and not retreating, he says. Besides, we are preparing ourselves to go forward. We're not preparing just to defend here. US and British intelligence say Putin seems to have, quote, massively misjudged this situation and clearly overestimated the abilities of his military to secure a rapid victory. And this old lady tells us, I have seen one war and here we go again. I wish Putin would go away. The people of this land remain stalwart and the soldiers remain dug in, hoping they can continue to withstand whatever Putin has in store for them next.
Christiane Amanpour reporting. Now here in Brussels, President Zelensky delivered another speech to the Belgian Parliament. It's his 17th such speech to a national parliament or an international parliament. It was tailor-made, as has been the way. He lambasted Belgians over diamond imports from Russia. He then went on to accuse some Belgians of valuing Russian diamonds over peace, and he appealed for more support.
But the world is so used to freedom that they don't want to notice how much the fight for freedom costs. For example, Russian diamonds in Antwerp are more important than the war in the east of Europe, or those who think that accessibility of European ports to Russian ships is more important than standing against the Russian war machine.
Now, President Putin has lashed out at Europe. We've been talking about this earlier, barring top EU officials from Russia. And this list is in response to sanctions. Of course, with me is Nick Robertson. No individuals were named in this list, and I'm not sure too many of them are going to Russia anyway. What was the purpose?
The purpose is to show the European Union that Russia is now finally taking action against the sanctions that's been put against it. The Russians are going to target those European parliamentarians that they believe are most responsible. They're going to target the vast majority of actually those who sit within the EU Parliament, but also European Union leaders.
To what purpose?
In a way, today was the day that Russia declared a war on Europe, on European Union leaders. The sanctions have been placed on Russia. Russia's taking action, as you've been speaking about already in the program, on oil and making countries pay in rubles. That's not going to work. Blackmail is what you heard just standing here a short while ago. And this, in essence, is the same. This is Russia trying to hit back. There aren't many ways it can actually do it. It's, if you will, it's theatrical, but it does show where President Putin's mindset is. He is feeling that after those first round of sanctions, 4 rounds now, the EU and the United States have placed on Russia, that he appears to be feeling confident. This is what the Polish Prime Minister, how he described it earlier today.
We'll have a listen.
For the time being, Putin and his people, they were able to change the fiscal policy, monetary policy, financial policy in such a way that they are immune to the sanctions to some extent, at least for the foreseeable future, for the next several months.
But the interesting thing about the sanctions, as President Biden retorted when he was in Europe last week, he basically said sanctions aren't meant to work. They're not meant to deter. They work over a long period of time.
Yes, and that's true. And we've heard that if you give them a year, then they could knock 10% off Russia's economy, which would be sizable, which would be significant. But it is significant that we've been hearing today that we weren't hearing last week from European Union leaders, the energy commissioner here, the German economy minister, both saying actually we're going to have to suffer some pain here in Europe.
Do you think that realization was always available? They've just come to it now.
I think that they can't move ahead of their populations. Think back to last week, Chancellor Scholz saying that we can't put pain on our population. I interviewed the Greek Prime Minister sitting outside here. He can't put our people into pain, he said. Why? Because there will be a potential backlash from populations who support what they're doing in Ukraine.
They're not going to have any choice now,
They don't, and so they've got to move on it. They've got to bring their populations with them. I think it was articulated very clearly in this war that democracy doesn't come for free, and although you won't get your hands dirty fighting the war because it could lead to World War II, this is NATO's position, there is still a price to pay for the values of democracy which are being upheld in Ukraine and supported there, and this is it. This will be the knock-on economic effect in Europe, and it is going to be hard for politicians here to sell it to their populations, but it's going to be necessary.
You know, I hope it doesn't seem inappropriate, first of all, to say it's good to be here with you, person, face to face, since we normally talk. And also, I assure you, we did not coordinate beforehand.
We didn't.
We didn't.
No, but we're matching today.
Next time.
Next time.
Nick Robertson, thank you so much.
You
thank you. When we come back, there are hundreds of planes that are in the international fleet in Russia. Now, some of them have been seized by the Europeans. Many more remain. What's going to happen to them? The man responsible for seizing the planes in a moment.
Air Quality Update, in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth. Air Quality Update, in association with Copernicus, Europe's Eyes on Earth.
Cooking meat at high temperatures produces cancer-causing chemicals called heterocyclic amines, or HCAs. So what's a pitmaster to do? Well, marinate it. Marinating meat with antioxidant-rich spices for 30 minutes before you grill can lead to fewer of those dangerous chemicals being released. A National Institutes of Health study found store-bought powdered marinade containing rosemary and thyme could reduce the amount of carcinogens in cooked meat by up to 87%. And you can make a marinade yourself using your own herbs: basil, sage, thyme, oregano, and rosemary. Also, choose leaner meats. So instead of burgers or brats, try chicken, fish, grass-fed steak. Avoid overcooking or burning the meat on the outside. That's when cancer-causing chemicals are released. Those black char marks might look good, but they're what you want to avoid.
You can help the refugees from Ukraine. Join the over 70,000 who've already raised millions for food, shelter, and more. Explore cnn.com/impact. Click to take action.
We're in Brussels for the Airlines for Europe, where we've been talking to the CEOs. In Russia, President Putin announced 100 billion rubles in support of the Russian airline industry. It was with representatives, and he criticized the Western sanctions against him. Now, Russia has seized those foreign planes that are owned by the leasing companies and leased to Russian airlines. They've done so in retaliation for Western sanctions. The planes were supposed to be returned to the Western leasing companies. Now, those Western companies are trying to repossess the planes whenever they can. There's more than 500 of them. So far, only about 80 have been repossessed. You can see on this screen planes owned by the Irish leasing companies. Now, they were recently tracked flying in Russia by Flight Radar 24. Every time one of those planes, and it's not happening at the moment, but every time one of them in the past flew out of Russia to an international destination, they were seized and impounded. And the man responsible for helping put it all together is Henrik Hololoi. He is the EU Commission Director of Mobility and Transport, and he explained to me the scale of the problem.
There were about 515 aircrafts in Russia, and we have been able to get back about 80 aircrafts and 40 of them during the war. So we can say that about 435 aircraft have been stolen by Russia.
When you say get back, these are the sanctions now mean, and these planes have to be returned to their leasing companies. They have to be impounded, if you like.
Yes, Richard, absolutely, because they are owned by the European companies. They are owned by the European leasing companies, and all of them are actually domiciled in Ireland. And of course, if there is a plane which is belonging to the leasing company, and if Russian airlines are flying it outside, then we obviously ask the third country to ground the plane, because those planes do not have airworthiness certificates anymore, and they are obliged to ground these planes according to the Chicago Convention, international air law, and basically then the owners would be repossessing these aircraft.
What do you believe that 435 planes, what's going to happen to them? Because even if the war was to end today, God, those planes are what?
These planes, when they are flying, they also have to be maintained constantly. There are also spare parts, and there are also sort of special arrangements that you have to do with these planes. This is not going to happen, and that would also mean that the value of these planes obviously diminishes over time. And it is also very unlikely that it will be possible to use these planes held anywhere else.
Really? Even if the Russians said, right, come and get your planes.
Well, if
come
they
and
will,
get your planes.
If that miracle happens, then I think we would be, and we will be able to get them now, then it is still okay, because it hasn't been so much time and these planes have been well maintained until now. But I'm very much afraid that the fate of these 435 aircrafts seems very questionable.
Right, it's going to end up in the courts.
I'm sure it's going to end up in the courts. It's also the issue between the lessors and the insurers, and you might have seen as well that the world's largest lessor, AerCap, has already asked the insurance claim for about $3.5 billion. So, yeah, I think that these issues are going to be discussed for a long time.
And you still have people watching, just in case one of those planes comes up?
We are monitoring the movement in the airspace all the time, and we have been able, together with the lessors and together with the third country authorities, to get a number of planes back, and I think that every plane we get back, it's a good thing.
That's Henrik Hololoi of the Mobility Directorate talking to me as we continue tonight live in Brussels. By the way, just for those of you who are wondering, because it does look cold, it's 3 degrees Celsius, which I'm told is 37 degrees Fahrenheit, and there's a strong, very strong wind. And you know where that's going. As we continue tonight, Ryanair, the chief executive, says the Ukraine crisis really reinforces the importance and the need for a strong aviation sector. You'll hear from Michael O'Leary next.
Free the Girls is an anti-trafficking organization that was started to help survivors re-enter the workplace through the sale of secondhand bras in used clothing markets around the world. My name is Dave Terpstra, and I'm co-founder of Free the Girls. One of the things that we discovered that survivors struggle with is getting back into society after they've been rescued, after they've been rehabilitated. How do they re-engage real life? And so we created a program that's designed to help them start their own micro-enterprise and grow their own business for themselves. We have women donate bras, and as we say, bras are something women wear close to their hearts. And this is an issue that touches the hearts of many women, and they want to play a part. They hear about these women who are traumatized, who have been trafficked around the world in terrible situations, and this is such a tangible way for them to reach out. When CNN first came 10 years ago to tell our story, we hadn't yet shipped our first container of bras. And CNN was there to record the entire process when that container arrived. That first container had 30,000 bras. We've since shipped 9 40-foot containers. Over 1 million bras have come here to Mozambique for our women to sell. That has transformed some lives.
This is the result of one single blast.
3.3 million Ukrainians have now fled this country.
You don't have to go far to find a family who has been displaced.
We just heard an air raid siren ring out.
We run down to cover. It is hard to imagine life returning here.
In Kiev, Dnipro,
Poland.
This is CNN.
The chief executive of Ryanair says European aviation is facing unprecedented problems. Put it this way, COVID, rising energy costs, and it's the biggest mess he's ever seen. Michael O'Leary was speaking to me here in Brussels.
I think it's the biggest mess the airline industry has ever faced, certainly in Europe. We've had 2 years now of COVID, travel restrictions, flight bans that we've never had before, and then it's been followed by the tragic Russian invasion of Ukraine. We have never seen disruption like this to air travel, but I remain optimistic. I think one of the things that is emerging out of this is a newfound appreciation for the need for free movement of people across Europe and the need for keeping air travel affordable and maybe postponing some of the more penal environmental measures because Europe's consumers can't afford them.
Why has aviation failed to get the message across that it is doing great things towards it? Maybe not as much for some, but it is making it. Why have the industry failed?
I blame the media.
Oh, come on.
Because you want to show global warming, it's always a picture of an aircraft taking off out of an airport. Shipping accounts for double aviation's EU CO2 emissions in Europe. 5% is against 2%, but nobody's ever going to show a ferry chugging out of the port. It's always, there's the aircraft, look at the contrails. And we need to be much more aggressive in explaining to people we account for about 2% of Europe's CO2 emissions, shipping accounts for about 5%, road transport 26%. Stop blaming aviation. As the tragic events in Ukraine demonstrate, you need aviation and we need to prioritise and encourage the free movement of people across the continent of Europe.
The difficulty is the demand is huge at the moment. You've brought nearly all your aircraft back. Your percentage of versus 2019 is up there again.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, we expect to grow by about 10% this year. We did 150 million passengers pre-COVID, and if there are no more COVID disruptions this year, we think that'll grow to 165 million passengers. But remember, a lot of that growth is us filling in gaps of airlines like Norwegian, who significantly cut the fleet, Alitalia reduced the fleet by 50% in Italy. We're taking up slack that's been left by others. I don't think it's overall market growth.
And in terms of what you now need from regulators or from authorities, I mean, you continue to bash airports and costs. I mean, it wouldn't be the aviation if you weren't doing that.
I think what we really need from Europe is a more coherent response to, COVID or pandemics. Europe has for 40 years operated on free movement of people, yet during COVID, you had national governments shutting down access or trying to limit travel.
If we look at the way where you're going to grow, Ryanair, where is it going to be?
I mean, it's broadly spread across Europe this year. Italy is a big area of growth. We're putting 25 of the 65 new aircraft into Italy. We're growing strongly in Poland, Slovakia, Romania.
So hang on, just to pause that. So Italy, you're taking on ITA and Lufthansa effectively now, if that deal goes ahead. You're taking on Joseph in Central and Eastern Europe.
Who? Never heard
Wizz
of
Air.
them. Who? Never heard of them.
You're moving into Wizz Air territory.
It's our territory. We're already the biggest airline in Poland. You know, he's not able to compete with Ryanair. But I think because the demand is everywhere. We're also growing in Portugal. We've opened a base yesterday in Funchal in Madeira, 2 aircraft. So there are growth opportunities